Greetings from Great Barrington, Massachusetts. I'm Karen Christensen, talking to colleagues around the world about topics that I write about at Karen's Letter. We often talk about books. Sustainability is always a focus. I latched onto this saying, think globally, act locally, when I was very young, and it sums up what you'll find at this podcast about the way we live now. Just weeks after the 2020 COVID-19 shutdown here in Massachusetts, Ray Oldenburg and I were interviewed for a Boston radio segment about the loss of third places. For some time, journalists would find Ray via his publisher or via his university, and he'd pass the person along to me. After talking to them for a bit, he'd say, well, you better talk to Karen too. But this particular interview was, to my knowledge, the last time a journalist was able to interview Ray himself and then play that recording or include that recording in his program. And you'll be able to hear him now in this very brief clip.
Professor named Ray Oldenburg, you're the first guy to identify this concept of food places. He wrote a book in 1989 called The Great Good Place. And the concept was basically people need a place to go interact with other people that's not home and not work. With people who are kind of less intimately tied to and possibly less fraught kind of interactions. I sort of jokingly call it the cheers factor. People want to go where everybody knows their name. Oldenburg fitted in his third place used to be a bakery where he would stop in the morning on his way to work and he'd get coffee and talk with the other regulars.
If you become a regular at the third place, any problem you have, you just mention it and the guys can help you out. When we lose the third place, life becomes harder and lonelier.
He said at one point, another one of the regulars at the coffee shop fixed an alternator on his car while he sat there having coffee.
That's awesome. I wish I could say I have had an experience like that. But, as I was thinking about this, I was feeling regretful. I don't have, a barber shop or some place where I have had a kind of hangout. Am I, not in that group?
Well, it's sort of interesting. I think that modern times, some of it has changed for us, and there may be certain retired people who are more likely to go and spend an hour or two at the coffee shop. But I spoke with a Great Barrington editor named Karen Christensen. She's working with Oldenburg on an updated version of the book. And she said that even casual interaction at the coffee shop or in the bookstore are just as important. Even if it's just chatting about the weather or local politics.
This is what makes us human, connecting with other people beyond our family circles, beyond our workmates. And it's what gives joy. That's what third places are. They make us happy.
At that point, it seemed like we'd been locked down forever. With schools and shops and businesses closed, we were worrying about toilet paper and about washing down grocery items with bleach. But it had actually been less than 3 weeks. We had no idea what was ahead, and were hoping that it was all a bad dream. But of course, as you know, it was a full year until vaccines were being rolled out and things started slowly to move again. The questions asked during that interview were a sign of the times and of the shock that we'd all experienced. There was discussion of whether third places as businesses could survive. This was before the various stimulus packages were launched. The focus of that conversation with Paul Singer of WGBH Boston was whether we would ever feel safe again going into a third place. Would we avoid other people forever, never shake hands or hug? Would we just stay at home where we could be safe and do everything by screen? Ray and I, no surprise, said that we all need face-to-face socializing, and of course we'd return to our third places, assuming they were still there. We talked about the importance of those special places and what they brought to us. What didn't get into the recording is one question I answered quite vehemently. The reporter, Paul Singer, asked me, "Will this pandemic change our lives forever?" "Not as much as climate change," I retorted. A week after that broadcast, I called Ray on his birthday. It wasn't the last time we talked. We had a couple of Zoom cocktail hours later on in the lockdown with some other friends, but it is the last time, that birthday call, that I recorded a conversation with him. He was having trouble remembering things, but here's a bit of that
In my
conversation.
hometown, the men gathered in the barber shop daily, whether they needed a haircut or not, and they talked. And the women had a habit of hanging around. The hair salon was a room within our pharmacy, and it was a place for women to gather.
Yeah, and it was a place basically exclusive to women. In those days, hair salons and barbershops were separate. That nowadays most places are unisex. But when I went out with you, I went with a breakfast group, and that was all men, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
no, you're talking about Hardee's, I think.
Yeah. And I think we talked about sometimes one or two of the members had brought his wife along, but I think we talked about that changing the flow of conversation.
Yeah, I'm sure it did. I remember there was 8 in the group. 7 of them were big Trump fans, and one was a very vocal liberal. So
wow. So
that's all I really remember about that.
Now, of course, bars are a great third place, but women have not always felt comfortable in a bar, or even been allowed sometimes. I mean, in England, in pubs, there was a separate place that the ladies were expected to go.
Yeah, bar seating. To me, where people get coffee in the morning is far more conducive to what we're talking about than bars.
Because of the seating, or because of the
Our friend Dugan,
yeah,
he and Peg, they're suffering now because they would go to bar 7 days a week.
So that's a big deal. Yeah. I'm actually getting on something this afternoon. It's at 3:00. It's an email group of digital publishing people, and I think it's at 3 so that people in Europe can join. But it's supposed to be like a beer. It's sort of getting together for drinks. Of course, people in California, it's being timed so that someone in California and I think someone in London or somewhere in Europe could get on at the same time. And I'm thinking, 3:00, could I have a martini then? I think, COVID-19, I think a martini at 3:00 will be just fine. I think it was the journalist from Boston who said he'd talked to you a little bit about, I think he said he'd talked to you about men and women. And that he and I then discussed that, the idea that women have often traditionally, and maybe still do today, if, you bring up bridge, tend to be more comfortable meeting when they have something to do together.
Of course, then there's, at our church, and in most churches, there is that group of women who make quilts.
Yeah, quilting would be classic.
Yeah.
Where you're occupied with something useful, but your mind is free, and so you can chat.
Yeah. Well, what I would insist on, that men only and women only gatherings are absolutely essential.
Okay. Tell me about that. Why does that matter? What makes that a single sex gathering place special?
okay, how do you express it? You don't, when the men get together, and I'm sure this is true of women too, I'm sure women will discuss things that they would never discuss in the presence of men.
Mm-hmm.
I'm guessing, because on the other side, men discuss things they would never discuss in the presence of women. So there's this male camaraderie thing that is important, and it's for women. I'm sure the same thing is true. But what we're talking about here is, under what conditions can you have some kind of third place where the sexes are mixed? Well, I think we did it with school children.
Mm-hmm.
I remember getting together after school at the soda fountain, and there would be males and females there, and we got along quite nicely. That's about the only mixed thing that I was involved in.
When you have gone and talked about The Great Good Place or heard from people about it, do you have a sense of whether there's been more interest from men or women? It seems like in celebrating the third place, there are lots of examples that are women starting third places, aren't there?
I don't know. This is why I brought the whole thing up, because there's so much I don't know about this this mixing thing. I just don't know. There was a blind spot when I got, why am I worrying about it now? I should have been worrying about it when I wrote the damn book. I didn't.
So it wasn't something that came up, because certainly in your subtitle, feels very inclusive. The fact that you put in hair salons, which was very specifically for women. But I think this is one of the things that people will be interested in now, and just maybe the history of it, because obviously some societies have really kept the sexes apart, and others had a lot more opportunity to mix in a friendly, way, an informal way.
Well, again, this 100-year thing makes me wonder if there is, in some way, an improvement for women in terms of this sort of thing. I just don't know. I know about quilting, and I know about bridge, and I know about the hairstyle places, but beyond that,
Do you know any women? What about book clubs? Have those come into your?
Oh, that's interesting.
I talked to a woman recently. I can't remember who it was, and she said she'd gone to her book club and they'd had a chosen book and all. She said, but we don't really talk about the book. It's just an excuse for us to get together. But that would be meeting, probably a book club, they'd meet in people's homes. Do you think that it makes a difference if it's, bridge, that would be at somebody's house. Do you think it makes it different from a third place that doesn't belong to any one of the people there?
If it's a public place, of course, you've got non-regulars, you got people coming and going, and it's a shifting population. But if you confine it to the home, the population is pretty regular.
Right. Yeah, will be. And even sometimes they vote on whether to allow somebody new to come in. So it's very different from a place that, Ray, what I've been thinking a lot about, I was telling my daughter how long before I ever met you, you were sending me book recommendations. We've corresponded for years. And one of the books that I think about now, because of the troubles in the world, is one called The Company of Strangers, and you suggested it. And it was about the importance of being able to deal with people you don't know and who are different from you.
I work at that very, very hard. course, I'm not going to my physical therapy place anymore, but I did one. But one of the routines, you're sitting next to people who are also on the thing where you pump your legs.
Yeah.
Oftentimes it's a woman, and I have this stock of questions. Are you a native Pensacola? Do you have a dog? Blah blah blah. I have those questions that get us talking right away, immediately.
Yeah.
And when I go shopping, I always talk to people. I have this. Of course, this is why I wrote The Joy of Tippling. Good thing about booze, it brings people together.
Right. And gets them talking, too.
And get them talking, yeah.
Right. So it's that about the joy of tippling, the joy of conversation, both. But don't you think that one of the things we see in the world today is a real fear of strangers? People kind of getting more and more kind of tightly bound to to people who are just like them or who think like them. You just were talking about being with Trump voters. Yeah.
Single-use zoning has had, to me, a tremendous impact on that. We have neighbors, and only on either side, they're good people, but we have nothing to do with them unless there's some kind of a little emergency that brings us together. We respect their privacy. They respect our privacy. And, of course, as you well know, homes have doubled in size over the past so many years, and more and more of life is contained to the home, and electronics that help us along and so on. I often think of my hometown where so many of the stores had wooden benches outside. People would meet one another, sit down on these benches and talk for a little bit, and then they'd move on. Those days are gone. They're already gone.
Because it was so easy to do. You'd bump into people and you'd chat. Yeah. You'd chat for a minute. I'll call again, and what we should talk about is just how third places will pick up when we can get back together. That's what I keep thinking about, is how, the economics of it, but when will you be able to go back to places that you like, or Dugan and Peggy?
Yeah, well, there's a lot apropos of this topic that we need to that needs investigating. It's endangered in a sense. I think about the people who will never become regulars, who just don't take to that sort of thing, and I wonder about them. But
Yeah. Well, it's going to be interesting to see what I'm hoping that people will realize how much they miss just being around other people. I wanted the new book to, again, just to alert people. It's like everyone, you've told me this, and it certainly was true for me, that The Great Good Place made us realize something we sort of knew already, but we'd never been able to articulate.
When you think about it, the third place is an extremely simple idea. The wonder is that it had to catch on, that it had to make people aware.
Yeah, right. All right, well, I'm going to let you get back to your day, but it's good to hear you, and we will talk again. I discovered then that people do forget pandemics, though I found it hard to believe when we were in the middle of the crisis. It's true, though, at a certain point, each of us decided to pack up our masks and step out into the world, to shake proffered hands, to accept hugs, and to huddle up close to the people we're in conversation with. In fact, one of the first signs of change was when bars reopened. They were packed with people. When, with the help of Ray's friend Dugan, we had a Zoom cocktail hour. We were all joking that, of course, convivial spots like bars were the very first place people went back to. Now it is September. 2024, and I'm reflecting on how the pandemic has made people so very much interested in the idea of a third place. But it's complicated. I wish I could talk to Ray about it. The term third place is being used so widely and so loosely that my first task with this new book is to parse out all these definitions and to clarify what really we mean by third place. I'm always asked, as Ray was, to define the third place, and my definition is exactly the same as his was. But a lot of people think that third place means any public space at all. Maybe that's because just being in proximity with other people was such a tremendous change after the lockdown. Other people, Americans in particular, often I'll hear them saying that, well, there are no more third places, so we have to turn to government or nonprofits to create hubs and clubs and community centers, or we just all have to sit online, but nobody really wants to do that anymore. Admittedly, Starbucks and the fast food companies haven't helped by removing chairs and tables, and everyone everywhere has seen small businesses that traditionally served as third places close down, whether because of the pandemic or all the other changes that we see in our world. There's something really worrying that happened, not just during the COVID lockdowns. A lot of people, especially young people, became used to looking at a screen and not at real people. Real life, real people made them anxious. But at the same time, and I hear this over and over again, these young people say, they're lonely and sad and desperately longing for true friendship and longing to be truly seen. We really do need third places distinct from anything else. I'd like to see other terms applied to other types of space, public spaces in general, because we need to cherish and we need to be able to see and identify the very special, the unique, and yet ubiquitous, common everywhere, places that Ray Oldenburg was able to identify for us back in 1989 as third places. Thank you for joining me at The Way We Live Now, a podcast where we roam the world for ideas and inspiration and talk about tools that will help to make the world a better place. I'd really love to have your ideas and comments. Please leave a comment below and subscribe to the feed. You can sign up for my newsletter, which I try to make a real letter, at KarenChristensen.substack.com.